There is a quiet change happening in churches across the world, and most people have not even noticed it. It did not arrive suddenly. There was no announcement, no debate, and no dramatic moment when everything changed. It happened little by little, one generation at a time, until what once would have seemed unthinkable now feels completely normal. If you stood at the back of many Catholic churches on a Sunday morning and simply watched people enter, you would see something that goes far deeper than clothing or personal style. You would be witnessing a spiritual shift, one that raises serious questions about how deeply modern Catholics truly believe in what is taking place at the Holy Mass. Because what is Mass? Is it merely a gathering of believers? Is it a weekly tradition, a comforting routine, or a symbolic remembrance of Christ? The Catholic faith has always answered that question with extraordinary clarity. At every valid Mass, when the words of consecration are spoken by a priest, the bread and wine become the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. This is not poetry. It is not symbolism. It is not a spiritual metaphor designed simply to inspire good feelings. It is a central truth of Catholic belief taught from the earliest centuries of Christianity and reaffirmed throughout the history of the Church. If this is true, then everything changes. Think about what that means for a moment. When you walk through the doors of a Catholic church, you are entering a place where Catholics believe God Himself is truly present. The creator of the universe, the one who holds every star in existence, the one before whom angels veil their faces, is there. And if we genuinely believe that, should it not affect how we prepare ourselves? Should it not influence how we speak, how we behave, and even how we dress? Human beings naturally understand the importance of outward preparation. If someone were invited to meet a king, attend a wedding, receive an award, or participate in an important ceremony, they would likely think carefully about what they wear. Not because clothing is everything, but because clothing communicates something. It reveals what we think about the event and how much importance we assign to it. We dress differently for special occasions because we instinctively recognize that some moments deserve greater honor than others. So a difficult question naturally follows. If we make such efforts for earthly events, what does it say when we approach the Holy Mass with less preparation than we would give to a formal dinner or a business meeting? What does it reveal about our understanding of the Eucharist if we approach the greatest mystery of our faith with complete casualness? This is not a condemnation of poverty, nor is it a criticism of those who possess very little. God sees the heart. The person who owns only a few simple clothes but offers them to God with love and reverence gives something beautiful. The worker who comes directly from an emergency shift because he refuses to miss Mass demonstrates a profound devotion that many should admire. The issue is not wealth or social status. The issue is attitude. The deeper concern is the growing belief that external actions no longer matter, that intentions alone are sufficient. Many people say, God only cares about my heart. There is truth in that statement, but it is often misunderstood because the heart expresses itself through actions. Love is demonstrated through choices. Respect becomes visible through behavior. Reverence is not merely an internal feeling hidden away in the mind. It naturally seeks expression. A husband who claims to love his wife while constantly treating her with indifference sends a contradictory message. In the same way, a believer who claims to recognize the infinite holiness of the Eucharist while making no effort to prepare outwardly may unknowingly reveal a disconnect between belief and practice. Exterior actions do not replace interior devotion, but they often reveal and strengthen it. For nearly 2,000 years, the Church has understood this principle. Christian tradition has consistently encouraged modesty, dignity, and reverence in sacred places. The saints understood that the body participates in worship alongside the soul. The way we kneel, the way we pray, the way we fast, and yes, even the way we dress, all help shape our interior disposition toward God. This is why the question of clothing at Mass is not simply about fashion. It is ultimately about faith. It is about whether we still possess a sense of the sacred in an age that increasingly treats everything as ordinary. Because when nothing is considered sacred anymore, eventually even the Mass begins to appear ordinary. And once the extraordinary mystery of God's presence starts to feel ordinary, something precious has already been lost. The loss of reverence rarely happens all at once. It happens slowly, almost invisibly. A generation grows up seeing certain behaviors and naturally assumes they are normal. Children watch adults enter church dressed no differently than they would for shopping, sports events, or casual gatherings, and they begin to absorb a silent lesson. They learn, without anyone saying a word, that Mass must not be very different from everything else. Culture teaches constantly, even when no one is speaking. Every action inside a church becomes a form of catechesis. This is why previous generations placed such importance on preparing for Sunday. Families often laid out their clothes the night before. Parents reminded their children that they were not simply going somewhere, they were going to meet the Lord. Men dressed with dignity, women prepared carefully, and children were taught from an early age that Sunday was different from every other day of the week. This was not because earlier generations were obsessed with appearances or social status. It was because they possessed a profound awareness of the sacred. Many modern people hear words like modesty and immediately think only about avoiding inappropriate clothing. But the Christian understanding of modesty has always been much larger than that. Modesty is about recognizing dignity. It is about presenting oneself in a way that reflects the importance of the occasion and the value of the human person. A Catholic is not simply an individual making private choices. A Catholic is a baptized child of God, someone whose body has been created by God, redeemed by Christ, and destined for resurrection. This understanding changes how we see ourselves. The body is not an object to be displayed for attention, nor is it something insignificant that can be treated carelessly. The body participates in worship. The body kneels, receives Holy Communion, makes the sign of the cross, and enters sacred spaces. Because of this, the way we present ourselves before God carries meaning. There are, broadly speaking, two problems that often arise. The first is obvious immodesty. Clothing that unnecessarily exposes the body or intentionally draws attention to physical appearance can become a distraction, not only for oneself, but also for others who have come to pray. Human beings are embodied creatures. We are affected by what we see, hear, and experience. The church has always recognized this reality. Charity requires us to think not only about ourselves, but also about the spiritual well-being of others. Yet there is another issue that may be even more widespread today. It is not necessarily immodesty, but indifference. It is the attitude that says, this is good enough. This does not deserve any extra effort. A person may wear clothing that is technically modest while still approaching Mass with complete casualness and little thought. The issue is not whether every Catholic must wear expensive clothing or follow a specific fashion standard. The issue is whether we consciously prepare ourselves for an encounter with God. Imagine being invited to meet someone you deeply admire. Most people would spend time preparing. They would think about their appearance, not out of vanity, but out of respect. They would want their outward actions to reflect the importance of the moment. Why should our encounter with Christ in the Eucharist deserve less consideration? The crisis of reverence in modern Catholic life did not begin with clothing, but clothing has become one visible sign of a deeper problem. Over the past several decades, many people have gradually lost a sense of awe before the sacred. The language of sacrifice, mystery, and holiness has often been replaced by language that emphasizes comfort, familiarity, and convenience. Slowly, almost without realizing it, many Catholics have come to view church as simply another place rather than a sacred space set apart for worship. Exterior actions shape interior beliefs more than we often realize. This is why every religion in history has used symbols, rituals, sacred music, and physical gestures. Human beings learn not only through ideas, but also through experiences, the smell of incense, the beauty of sacred art, the silence before the tabernacle, the reverence shown by others. All of these things teach the soul. The same principle applies to clothing. When families intentionally prepare for Mass, they communicate something powerful to themselves and to their children. They silently proclaim, this matters. This is important. Something sacred is happening. Over time, these repeated actions shape the heart. They create habits of reverence that remain for a lifetime. This is one reason why the saints consistently emphasized the importance of external discipline. St. Thomas Aquinas taught that exterior acts of religion help direct the soul toward interior devotion. The church has always understood that human beings are not pure spirits. We are body and soul together. Therefore, what we do externally can either strengthen or weaken our interior disposition toward God. Consider what happens when an entire parish embraces reverence. A newcomer entering such a church immediately senses that something is different. The atmosphere itself teaches silence becomes meaningful. The behavior of others inspires respect. Even someone who knows little about Catholic theology can instinctively recognize that this place is sacred. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine a parish where everything feels casual, hurried, and ordinary, where conversations resemble those of a shopping center, and where clothing communicates no distinction between the Mass and any other activity. Without anyone intending it, a message is still being sent. The message becomes, this is not particularly different from ordinary life. This is why small things matter more than we think. They are not small because they shape culture, and culture shapes belief. What people repeatedly experience eventually influences what they believe to be true. Reverence builds faith. Casualness often weakens it. None of this should produce guilt or discouragement. The purpose of these reflections is not condemnation, but renewal. Many Catholics simply have never been taught these things. Entire generations have grown up without hearing clear teaching on reverence, modesty, and preparation for Mass. God sees the sincerity of every soul and judges with perfect justice and mercy. But once we understand something more clearly, we are invited to respond. Every moment of greater understanding becomes an opportunity for deeper love. The question is not, how little effort can I give? The question is, how can I honor God more fully? Perhaps the answer begins with something simple: preparing clothes the night before, choosing attire that reflects dignity and reverence, teaching children that Sunday is special, taking a few extra moments before leaving home to remember where we are going and whom we are about to encounter. Because every Sunday, Catholics believe that heaven touches earth in the Holy Mass. Every Sunday, believers stand before the same Lord who calmed storms, raised the dead, forgave sinners, and gave his life for the salvation of the world. Every Sunday, if properly disposed, they approach the altar and receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ himself. If that reality is true, then perhaps nothing about our preparation is insignificant. Perhaps even the clothes we choose become a quiet prayer. Perhaps they become an act of love. And perhaps, in a world that increasingly forgets the sacred, even a simple decision to dress with reverence can become a powerful witness of faith. One of the greatest misunderstandings of our time is the idea that external actions have little influence on spiritual life. Modern culture often tells us that only intentions matter, that what is inside the heart is all that counts. Yet, Christianity has never taught such a separation. Human beings are not angels. We are not pure spirits floating above physical reality. We are creatures of body and soul, and the two constantly influence one another. Think about the way love works. A husband may sincerely love his wife, but if he never expresses that love through words, actions, sacrifice, or care, the relationship slowly weakens. A child may deeply respect his parents, but if he continually behaves as though they are unimportant, that respect eventually becomes empty words. Love seeks expression. Reverence seeks expression. Faith seeks expression. What we believe inwardly eventually becomes visible outwardly. This is precisely why the church has always paid attention to external acts of worship. The beauty of sacred vestments, the use of incense, the silence before the tabernacle, the candles upon the altar, the architecture of churches that lift the mind toward heaven. None of these things exist because God somehow needs them. God lacks nothing. These things exist because we need them. They educate the human heart. They remind us that we are standing before something infinitely greater than ourselves. The same principle applies to the faithful. The way we prepare ourselves for Mass forms us spiritually. Every time a family chooses to approach Sunday with seriousness and reverence, they are teaching themselves and their children an important lesson. Without saying a single word, they are declaring that God deserves their best. This becomes even more important when we remember that we never worship alone. Christianity is not merely a private relationship between an individual and God. We belong to the body of Christ. Our actions affect others. The atmosphere of an entire parish is shaped by the countless small decisions made by ordinary believers every week. When a visitor enters a church where people pray quietly, dress modestly, and carry themselves with dignity, something remarkable happens. Even before hearing a homily, that person senses that this place is different. They recognize that something sacred is occurring. The culture itself becomes a form of evangelization. On the other hand, when a church feels no different from any ordinary public gathering, the opposite lesson can be unintentionally communicated. The sacred begins to disappear beneath familiarity. The extraordinary mystery of the Mass slowly becomes treated as something ordinary. And once people lose their sense of wonder, faith itself often begins to weaken. History offers many examples of this connection between exterior reverence and interior renewal. Throughout the lives of the saints, we repeatedly see a profound respect for sacred spaces and sacred actions. St. John Vianney insisted upon reverence in his parish because he understood human nature. He knew that when people behave differently in church, they begin to think differently about church. Exterior discipline helps create interior transformation. This does not mean that holiness depends on expensive clothing or social status. God does not judge a person based on wealth or fashion. The poor widow who comes to Mass wearing simple but clean and respectful clothing may possess greater holiness than someone dressed elegantly but lacking love. God always sees the heart. At the same time, love naturally desires to give something beautiful. It wants to make an effort. When people prepare carefully for weddings, graduations, important meetings, and celebrations, they do so because these events matter to them. How much more should the holy sacrifice of the Mass matter? This question is especially important for parents. Whether they realize it or not, mothers and fathers are constantly teaching their children what is important. Children remember patterns more than lectures. They remember how Sunday felt in their home. They remember whether Mass was treated as a sacred encounter or simply another activity on the weekend schedule. A child who grows up seeing parents prepare carefully for Mass learns that God deserves reverence. A child who sees Sunday treated casually may unconsciously absorb a very different lesson. Years later, that early formation often continues to shape their understanding of faith. This is why the recovery of reverence matters so much. It is not merely about clothing, it is about rebuilding a culture of belief. It is about helping people rediscover the sacred in an age that constantly pulls attention toward the trivial and the temporary. For young people especially, this message can seem strange because modern culture often sends the opposite message. Society frequently teaches that personal expression is the highest good and that external appearance exists mainly to attract attention or communicate individual identity. But Christianity offers a far more beautiful vision. The church teaches that every human person possesses an immeasurable dignity. Your value does not depend on fashion, physical attractiveness, popularity, or social approval. Your value comes from the fact that you were created by God and redeemed by Christ. This truth changes everything. If your body is sacred, then it deserves dignity. If your soul has been purchased by the blood of Christ, then your life should reflect that reality. If you are preparing to receive the King of Heaven in Holy Communion, then even the smallest acts of preparation can become acts of love. This is why the church encourages practices such as fasting before communion, examining one's conscience, going to confession when necessary, and approaching the liturgy with reverence. These practices are not burdens designed to make life difficult. They are reminders. They help us remember what is truly happening because every Mass contains a mystery beyond human understanding. At every altar, heaven and earth meet. At every consecration, Christ becomes sacramentally present. At every worthy reception of Holy Communion, the believer enters into an intimate union with the Lord of the universe. Nothing in ordinary human experience compares to this. And if we truly believe that, then preparation no longer feels like an obligation. It becomes a privilege. The extra effort no longer feels unnecessary. It becomes an expression of gratitude. The small sacrifices no longer seem burdensome. They become gifts of love. Perhaps that is the real question every Catholic should ask before Mass. Not merely, what am I allowed to wear? Not, what is the minimum requirement? But rather, how can I best honor the one I am about to meet? Because love does not ask how little it can give. Love asks how much it can offer. And every Sunday morning presents believers with another opportunity to answer that question, to step away from the noise of the world, to remember who they are, to remember whose house they are entering, to remember that beyond the visible signs of bread and wine stands the same Christ who walked the roads of Galilee, forgave sinners, healed the sick, carried the cross, died upon Calvary, and rose again in glory. That reality deserves more than routine. It deserves attention. It deserves reverence. It deserves love. And perhaps one of the simplest ways to express that love is through a quiet act of preparation before leaving home, choosing to approach the house of God with dignity, gratitude, and the joyful awareness that we are about to stand in the presence of the King. In the end, this conversation is not really about clothing. It is about love. It is about whether we still possess the ability to recognize the sacred in a world that has become increasingly casual about everything. We live in an age where almost nothing is treated with reverence anymore. Authority is questioned, traditions are dismissed, and even the most holy realities can slowly become familiar to the point of indifference. The danger of familiarity is not that something becomes false. The danger is that something infinitely precious begins to feel ordinary, and perhaps this is one of the greatest spiritual battles facing modern Catholics. Not open hostility toward God, not direct rejection of the faith, but forgetfulness, a gradual loss of wonder, a slow fading of amazement before the mystery that stands at the center of every Mass. Because if we truly understood what was taking place on the altar, if we could see with our eyes what the saints believed with such certainty, every Mass would leave us speechless. We would enter the church differently. We would kneel differently. We would pray differently. We would prepare differently. Imagine for a moment that heaven allowed you to see reality as it truly is. Imagine entering a church and seeing countless angels gathered around the altar in adoration. Imagine seeing the invisible glory of Christ present in the Eucharist. Imagine witnessing heaven itself bending toward earth during the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Would anyone enter carelessly? Would anyone rush in distracted and indifferent? Would anyone think this is just another ordinary event? Of course not. And yet, the Church teaches that whether we can see it or not, these spiritual realities remain true. Faith means living according to realities that are often hidden from our physical eyes. This is why reverence matters. This is why preparation matters. This is why even small acts done with love possess extraordinary spiritual value. Preparing for Mass begins long before we enter the church doors. It begins in the heart. It begins when we intentionally set aside time for prayer. It begins when we examine our conscience, seek reconciliation with God through confession when necessary, observe the Eucharistic fast, and prepare ourselves interiorly and exteriorly to receive Christ. Every one of these practices says the same thing. You matter to me, Lord. I have not forgotten who you are. I have prepared myself because I know this moment is sacred. These acts are not legalism. They are love expressed through discipline. They are signs that faith is alive, because genuine love always prepares. A bride prepares for her wedding day. Families prepare for important celebrations. People prepare carefully when meeting someone they deeply admire. Preparation itself becomes a language of affection. The saints understood this profoundly. For them, even ordinary actions could become acts of worship when offered with love. The choosing of clothing, the careful preparation for Sunday, the reverent silence before Mass, all of these became small sacrifices that helped orient the soul toward God. Perhaps this is why so many saints possessed such deep joy. They understood that Christianity is not simply a collection of rules. It is a relationship with a living person. And when you love someone, you naturally desire to honor them. You naturally desire to offer your best, not because you are forced to, but because love itself compels you. For parents, this truth carries a special responsibility. The faith is often transmitted through small habits long before it is fully understood intellectually. Children remember what mattered in their homes. They remember the atmosphere of Sunday mornings. They remember whether preparing for Mass felt important. Teach them that Sunday is different. Teach them that preparing for Mass is already part of prayer. Teach them that reverence is not old-fashioned or unnecessary. Teach them that there are places in this world where heaven touches earth, because one day they may forget many of the lessons you tried to teach them. But they may still remember that every Sunday their family prepared to meet God, and that memory may become one of the very things that brings them back to the faith later in life. Grace is never wasted. No sincere effort made for God is ever insignificant. For those hearing this message for the first time, do not respond with guilt or discouragement. Respond with gratitude. Perhaps no one ever explained these things to you before. Perhaps you simply followed the examples you had seen. God knows this. God sees your heart, and every moment of greater understanding becomes an invitation, not a condemnation. Beginning this Sunday, simply ask yourself a few honest questions. Does what I wear reflect where I am going? Have I prepared myself to encounter Christ? Am I approaching this moment with love and reverence? Is there something small I can do to honor God more fully? You do not need perfection. You simply need intentionality. You simply need love, because every Sunday something astonishing happens. The same Jesus who was born in Bethlehem, preached beside the Sea of Galilee, forgave sinners, healed the broken, suffered on Calvary, and rose from the tomb, becomes truly present upon the altar. The Creator enters his creation. The King of heaven gives himself to his people. The infinite God allows himself to be received by finite human beings. There is nothing ordinary about this nothing. And if this truth truly reaches the heart, it changes everything. It changes how we see Sunday. It changes how we see worship. It changes how we see ourselves. And yes, it may even change the clothes we choose to wear. Because external reverence is never merely about appearance. It is about allowing our outward actions to proclaim the reality our hearts believe. It is about saying with our entire lives, Lord, I know who you are. I know where I am. I know what gift I am about to receive. And because I know these things, I want every part of my life, from my thoughts to my actions, from my soul to my outward preparation, to honor you. The Catholic faith has never promised comfort. It has always called people to transformation. It asks believers to see the world differently, to recognize the sacred, to live as people who know that eternity is real. And perhaps one of the most beautiful aspects of this faith is that even the ordinary things of life can become holy. A quiet prayer before leaving home, a family preparing together on Sunday morning, a simple act of choosing clothing with reverence, These small acts, offered with love, become offerings to God. They become reminders that faith is not confined to 1 hour on Sunday. Faith reaches into every part of life. Because when Christ truly becomes the center of our lives, even the smallest details begin to reflect his presence. So the next time you walk through the doors of a church, pause for a moment, look toward the tabernacle, remember who is waiting there. Remember the King who humbled himself to remain with his people. Remember the Savior who loves you enough to give himself completely in the Eucharist. And then enter with gratitude, enter with reverence, and with joy, because you are not simply attending an event, you are stepping onto holy ground. You are entering the house of God, and the greatest miracle on earth is about to unfold before your eyes.